Under the shimmering lights of ancient stone theaters, or in the shadow of majestic marble columns, ancient Greece was not only a civilization of great philosophers like Socrates and Plato, or legendary warriors of Sparta. Behind the heroic pages of history, of wars and philosophy, lay a deeply complex private world, one where human hearts experienced the full spectrum of love, resentment, and heartbreak. It raises a deeply human question, often shrouded in the mists of time. Could ancient Greeks get divorced? Imagine stepping across the threshold of an ancient Athenian home around the 5th century BCE. The air inside is suffocating, heavy with silence. A contract has come to an end. The truth is, ancient Greeks could not only get divorced, but their legal framework surrounding the dissolution of marriage was rich, sophisticated, and reflected the deep social structures of their time. However, the path to ending a marriage was vastly different depending on whether you were a man or a woman and which city-state you belonged to: aesthetic Athens, martial Sparta, or the island of Crete with its remarkably progressive laws. To understand the nature of divorce in ancient Greece, the crucial first step is to decode the nature of marriage itself. In ancient Greek thought, especially in the city-state of Athens, marriage was never meant to be the romantic culmination of personal love. It was simply a civil transaction, an economic and political alliance between two families, driven by two ultimate goals: producing legitimate male citizens to sustain the city-state and preserving family property. An ancient Athenian woman had virtually no autonomy over her own life. From birth to her final breath, she was always under the legal guardianship of a male relative, known as a kyrios. Before marriage, her kyrios was her father or brother. Upon entering her husband's home, this legal guardianship transferred to her husband. Because marriage was built on the foundation of a civil contract, it could be dissolved when its original objectives were no longer being met. However, the mechanism for unraveling that contract was a starkly unequal landscape. For an Athenian man, casting off a wife was astonishingly easy. This form of divorce was called apopempsis, which literally translates to sending away or dismissal. A husband did not need to petition a magistrate, did not require official authorization, and certainly did not need his wife's consent. He simply had to perform a straightforward act: expel his wife from the house or lead her back and hand her over to her father's household in front of a few witnesses from the community. The reasons for a husband to dismiss his wife could be entirely subjective. She might be infertile and unable to produce a male heir. Their personalities might clash, or quite simply, the husband found a new marriage prospect offering greater financial or political gain. However, there was one specific scenario where Athenian law mandated an immediate divorce: if the wife was caught committing adultery. In the eyes of Athenians, adultery was not just an emotional betrayal, but a crime against the family bloodline. If a husband knew his wife had been unfaithful and remained married to her, he himself would be stripped of his civic rights, atimia, and branded an outcast. This harshness stemmed from a profound fear in the ancient world: the pollution of the bloodline. They could not risk an outsider's blood inheriting family property and performing sacred ancestral rites. In stark contrast to the ease granted to men, the path to divorce for an Athenian woman was narrow, fraught with peril, and full of obstacles. A divorce initiated by a wife was called apoleipsis, meaning leaving or abandonment. A woman could not declare a divorce on her own because she lacked independent legal standing. To escape an abusive, violent, or neglectful husband, she had to rely on the help of her former kyrios, her father or brother. This male representative would then file a petition on her behalf with the archon eponymous, the highest magistrate in Athens, who oversaw family and property matters. The cruel catch was that the law required the wife to appear in person at the public magistrate's office to submit her petition. Imagine how terrifying this ordeal was for an Athenian woman. These were women who spent their entire lives confined to the gymnasium, the secluded women's quarters in the back of the house, rarely stepping onto the streets or speaking to male strangers. Stepping out into public, facing magistrates and crowds of curious men to expose intimate domestic tragedies required extraordinary courage. History records a bitter tragedy illustrating the danger of this process. The story of Hipparete, a beautiful noblewoman and wife of Alcibiades, a brilliant but notoriously arrogant and debauched general. Unable to endure her husband bringing courtesans, hetairai, into their home and squandering their fortune, Hipparete decided to leave his house and petition the archon for divorce. However, as she crossed the agora to reach the magistrate's office, Alcibiades appeared with a group of henchmen. He seized Hipparete in broad daylight and dragged her back home by force. Not a single citizen in the crowd dared to intervene, because, under the law, a husband retained physical control over his wife until the divorce judgment was officially pronounced. Hipparete was subsequently confined to the house and died in loneliness and grief without ever realizing her dream of freedom. Beyond these two paths, Athens recognized a third, highly unusual form of divorce, known as aphoresis. This was a divorce initiated directly by the woman's father, even if the husband and wife were living happily together. This occurred when a family faced a crisis. A father died or fell in battle without leaving a son, making his daughter an epikleros, an heiress carrying the entire family estate. In Athenian legal thought, family property could never be allowed to pass into another lineage. To preserve the estate and continue the paternal line, the father, or nearest male relative, had the legal right to dissolve the daughter's current marriage, forcing her to divorce her husband and marry her nearest male relative on her father's side. To modern sensibilities, this seems like a cruel disregard for human emotion, but to Athenians, the long-term survival of the lineage and the continuity of family wealth were the ultimate priorities. So, when the marriage contract was officially severed, what happened to property and children? This is where the pragmatic, economic mindset of the Greeks was most evident. Upon divorce, the husband was legally obligated to return the entire dowry that the bride's family had provided at the marriage. The dowry never belonged to the husband outright. He merely managed and drew income from it during the marriage. If they divorced, that money or land had to be returned intact to the woman's kyrios. If the husband delayed or attempted to dissipate the funds, courts imposed an exorbitant penalty interest rate, often as high as 18% per year. This financial safeguard unintentionally became a shield for women. Many husbands who came to despise their wives hesitated to expel them, knowing that returning a massive dowry could bankrupt them. In contrast to property protections, the fate of children after a divorce was tragic. In patriarchal Greece, children were considered the exclusive property and members of the father's lineage. When a marriage dissolved, the mother lost virtually all rights to custody and visitation. She would gather her dowry and return to her father's house, leaving the children behind to be raised by her ex-husband and his family. The mother was legally severed from the very children she bore, and those children grew up to inherit their father's estate. Yet, ancient Greece was not a single gloomy monolith like Athens. If we travel south to the formidable land of Sparta, a completely opposite picture of marriage and divorce emerges. In Sparta, society did not revolve around private family property, but around the state's ultimate military machine. The sole purpose of Spartan marriage was to produce the healthiest, bravest warriors. Spartan women enjoyed privileges that Athenian women could only dream of. They exercised publicly, received an education, and crucially, had the right to own and manage property in their own names. Consequently, divorce in Sparta was not viewed as a social scandal or moral tragedy, but simply as a technical adjustment serving the interests of the state. If a marriage failed to produce healthy children, either spouse, or even the state, could request a divorce to reorganize. Spartan law even permitted unique arrangements of marriage sharing. If an older husband had a young wife, he might invite a strong, accomplished young man to cohabit with his wife to produce genetically superior children for the state without a formal divorce. When infertility or incompatibility arose, divorce in Sparta was swift, equal, and bore almost no social stigma. Another astonishing example of ancient legal thinking is found on the island of Crete, embodied in the Code of Gortyn, the oldest stone-carved legal text in Europe, dating to the 5th century BCE. This code established remarkably progressive rights for women regarding divorce. According to the laws of Gortyn, When a couple parted ways, the woman was entitled not only to reclaim her personal property and original dowry, but also to keep half of the income and yield generated from that property during their time together. Furthermore, if the husband was at fault for the breakdown of the marriage, the wife was entitled to a fixed compensatory payment. The law also clearly outlined a mother's rights regarding children born after a divorce, granting Cretan women a degree of financial autonomy and personal standing that modern society would not reach again for many centuries. Looking back across the sweep of history, the ancient Greeks clearly constructed a detailed, practical, and profound legal understanding of divorce. The existence of divorce frameworks spanning from Athens to Sparta and Crete proves they never viewed marriage as an unbreakable, sacred chain. To the rational Greek mind, marriage was a tool of social organization. When that tool no longer served its purpose, whether in maintaining lineage, preserving property, or building state military strength, it had to be ended in an orderly, structured manner. While gender inequality was an undeniable historical reality, where women largely lived in the shadow of male authority, the fact that ancient law codified specific duties for returning property, paying damages, and allowing women to petition for divorce laid the initial building blocks for modern legal civilization. Divorce in the ancient Greek world was not just a story of broken bonds, but a vivid lens through which we can decode the social structures, rational mindset, and deepest secrets of human nature from thousands of years ago.